The NBA Finals are officially over, and now we're here to talk about the teams who are doing the opposite of the Lakers right now. Part 1 of this video, which was the bottom teams in the East, came out a few days ago, so if you haven't watched that, you should. I'll try to remember to link it in the description or on the end screen. But this episode is there's a little less big names. It's a lot of teams in the bottom of the West are, going to be above the cap, that kind of thing. So they don't have a lot of money for. While there aren't a lot of bigger names, there are some guys that I do think could still help out teams. So let's get right into it. We're looking in the West for this video, and oddly enough, the bottom of the West is the Golden State Warriors. Now, the Warriors are deep in the luxury tax, so really there is not a whole lot to talk about with them. They have a bunch of non-guaranteed contracts for most of the roster you saw this year, so who knows if they pick them up or not. But we have to try to find a guy who they could afford and who could actually contribute some, but we're likely looking in the minimum market. I think the Warriors should go after Bismack Biyombo. Biyombo is a defensive-oriented center who's coming off a huge contract, and I think he'll honestly fly way under the radar considering nobody has heard his name since a couple years ago. The Warriors currently don't have any type of rim protection, and they don't need anything other than rebound, dunk, and defense from their 5 spot. I think he'd choose the Warriors over other teams because he'd have an opportunity to win after coming off a huge payday, which may persuade him to take a little pay cut and accept the minimum or whatever exception the Warriors have available. As to why they target a center over a wing, Damian Lee really emerged as someone who could provide valuable minutes last season, and they have Jordan Poole as well, even if he was terrible. But Biyombo provides them something they don't have available, and I think he would do very nicely for them. Now we get back to the normal teams, the ones who belong at the bottom of the conference. Next up are the Minnesota Timberwolves, and there's a lot less to look at here than you might think. Cat and D'Lo are both on max contracts. James Johnson will be making $16 million next year, and Malik Beasley will likely command anywhere from $15 to $18 million a year in this free agency. The Wolves have a mid-level exception though, which could net them a pretty decent rotation player. What they're really looking for is a defensive-oriented wing or big to help out the defensive deficiencies of their top 3 guys on the roster. Okogie can only do so much by himself. As much as I am conflicted on this guy, I think they should go for Andre Roberson. The defense on this team is awful, and I really think the offense they have might just be good enough to cover up the fact that Roberson is a negative on that end. It could be a match made in heaven, or if you end up starting him and Okogie, the spacing could prove problematic. But they have to get some kind of veteran defender on this team, and Roberson is that, assuming he returns to playing for him. He hit some threes in the bubble for OKC, but who knows how much you should read into that. But I think he could be a pretty good target for the Wolves on an exception level contract. Next up is another team who looks like they will have a lot of cap space, but actually don't. The New Orleans Pelicans. Brandon Ingram will be getting a max from somebody, and they're gonna match it. So there goes their cap space right there. I also think they will re-sign Derek Favors, or they should, which will further put them over the cap. But depending on how much Favors gets, they could let him walk because nearing $140 million is a lot to pay for a team who hasn't shown any kind of results. This front office has shown that they want to compete though, and they've brought in a lot of veterans to help balance out the roster considering how many young players they have. But what these guys really need is a leader and a playmaker off the bench. Because as much as I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I don't think he's quite ready for that role. But while I'm not sold on this guy as an NBA player right now, I think if he gets comfortable and in a groove, he can provide a role like this off the bench. And that guy is Jeff Teague. Teague wasn't very good for the Hawks and hasn't been good in a little while now, but he's still a ball handler, a playmaker, and a veteran. He can move the ball to guys like Josh Hart and Nicolo Melli when they're open, and he can set up Jackson Hayes down low. He's not exactly a high-profile guy, and he might not be any good, but I do think he can handle playmaking off the bench, and he goes with the theme that New Orleans has been going with. Man, we're on the 4th team, and I realize like half these teams are in the exact same predicament. The Kings have Bogdan Bogdanovic to pay this offseason, and I see a world where he's getting like $15 million annually, and that takes out the rest of their cap space too. This team has point guards, even if Corey Joseph at $12 million a year is not a good option. They have bigs. What exactly do they need? Well, I think that kind of depends on what position they're going to decide Marvin Bagley is. But either way, I think a good fit for them could be Myers Leonard. I know, we're going with some seriously big names here in this series. I mean, all the big names have player options, which they'll likely accept, so I guess we're just going to name a bunch of niche guys the whole time. But as to why I chose Leonard, it's because of spacing. Spacing for De'Aaron Fox to drive to the rim, spacing to let Marvin Bagley operate in the post and from mid-range, spacing for all kind of things the Kings want to do with their offense. Now, if Olynyk was a free agent, I would probably choose him, but Myers Leonard is cool too. He can shoot and just be a big body. A lot won't be asked of him except to draw the attention on the perimeter, but I think he can do that just fine. So now we're down to the last team, and can you guess what kind of situation they're in? If you guessed a team with pending restricted free agents who are close to or already over the cap, then you guessed correctly. The San Antonio Spurs are our next team. They have guys like DeRozan, Aldridge, Rudy Gay, and guys like Jakob Poeltl, Bryn Forbes, and DeJounte Murray. Both Poeltl and Forbes are free agents, so if they get even $8 million each, that puts the Spurs at $136 million, obviously not leaving a lot of room for free agents. The Spurs are more or less complete roster, if I'm being honest. They don't really need a whole lot in terms of guys to contribute. They have a solid starting lineup, a solid bench unit, with a ton of young guys on their roster. So I think what they really need is another veteran to add to the mix to help prime the young guys on the bench for the NBA and for playing time when it eventually comes. One great veteran on the market is Tyson Chandler. He honestly will probably not even see a minute on the floor, but he's known to be a great locker room guy. This Spurs organization can put him to great use in that locker room with a lot of competition for positions and a lot of young guys trying to get their footing in the league. This may or may not lead to on-court production, but I do think Tyson Chandler could be a valuable addition to the Spurs team. I know this episode was filled with a bunch of end-of-the-bench guys, and it wasn't as interesting as the first, but if you did get this far and you did like the video, leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, leave a dislike. As we get on to better teams, we'll be able to talk about more interesting guys. It doesn't help that these teams had no cap space at all. But anyway, y'all have a good one.